To add interest to your photographs, look for patterns in the scene that you're photographing. Patterns are basically a repetition of a certain shape or structure. In the chaotic world of nature, it's sometimes really hard to find, but when you do find them, it can make for a really intriguing photograph. The pattern could be anything from a facade on a building, a close-up of a knitted jumper, to a rocky outcrop. Or the pattern could take up a small portion of your photograph, like this meandering river through the landscape. Whenever I'm shooting a city, I always look for patterns within buildings and structures. Architects and designers like patterns and form, so you can take advantage of this with your photography. In landscape photography, it could be a field of wheat or ripples in a desert, or more subtly, repeating shapes like these islands, or repeating shapes in the landscape like these 3 mountains in central Java. Now, these last 2 are a little bit more ambiguous, but with adding patterns to the shot, they add a little bit of intrigue to that photograph. Patterns are everywhere in nature, but they're quite hard to find and even harder to photograph. I find it easier to get them in man-made structures, but when you do find them in nature and you get a good photograph of them, it's really rewarding and it makes it all well worth it. Don't just think of patterns as having to be completely uniform across your photograph either. I was walking past a building and I noticed the chaos of the balconies with the uniformity of the colours. This is a bit of a chaotic pattern, but there's still a pattern there. The opposite of this would be just to have filled the frame with the same pattern, like this close-up of another building, or taking 2 opposing patterns and pushing them together, or finding interesting shapes showing off different patterns, or even finding small patterns within a scene. Can you see how many patterns there are within this shot? Let me know in the comments below. Later on, I'll tell you how many I think I can see. Another way to look for patterns is to look at how light hits a scene or shines through an object onto that scene. This could be the way the sun shines through the clouds, through a man-made structure, to a dappled bit of light shining through a canopy of trees. The human eye does tend to look for patterns in any kind of scene, whether man-made or natural. And I don't know about you, but I get this childlike sense of glee when I do spot one, and I instantly want to photograph it. Patterns can be captivating. They can help the viewer's eye flow through the shot, or just give a sense of uniformity, as if everything is in order. Or they can draw the viewer's eye to that part of the photograph. Patterns also give a sense of familiarity. If you see a shape on its own, it might not hold much significance, but when that shape repeats itself time and time again, it becomes very recognizable and the viewer will stick around for longer. Patterns in photography don't even have to be geometrically correct. You can have a very chaotic arrangement of objects, and that in itself forms a pattern. There are even patterns to be had in colour and contrast. In this photograph, I like the patterns being created by the holes in the roof of this building I was in, and I decided to put it next to the frame as I like how they sat together. To a certain extent, you can also control the viewer's emotions. If you want the sense of calm, fill the frame with a pattern, although it might give the sense of claustrophobia to some being so close to that subject. On the other hand, if you break a pattern, this could cause conflict within your frame. The rule of odds is in a way using patterns, and I always look for 3 things to put in my frames, whether it's 3 holes in a roof, 3 mountains, or 3 faces. There just seems to be something pleasing to a group of 3 things. It might take a while to get the right framing, and you might have to edge one way or another, and sometimes you'll take a photograph where you thought you were perfectly in line, and you get it back on a big screen on your computer at home, and it's completely out of line. So this does take practice, but take your time in lining it up perfectly, and you'll get a really nice shot. If you're struggling to see patterns in nature, try going to a wooded area where there's lots of tall trees. When the trees are tall, the lower parts of the trunk tend not to have any branches on, so you'll get all of these vertical lines, and that is in a way a pattern. Or maybe a rippled water surface. This will give a very nice repeating pattern. Patterns can also simplify what might be a really complex scene. In just including that pattern and nothing else, once the viewer understands the repeating shape, there's nothing else to understand. So in this case, it's a very easy photograph to look at. Now back to that photograph of the swimming pool, these are the patterns that I see. There are the sunbeds, the trees behind the sunbeds, the trees next to the pool, the plant beds below the pool, and then the trees along the bottom. So you can see there are a lot of small patterns in this one photograph. So it doesn't have to be one pattern throughout the entire photograph, it can be lots of different patterns within a scene. So remember, even though patterns are easier to see in man-made structures, they can also appear in nature. And once you start seeing them in nature, you'll start seeing them everywhere in nature. They are quite hard to photograph, but keep going at it and you'll get some good photographs of those patterns, and this will show that you're photographing with intention. Another form of a pattern is a leading line, and in next week's video I'll be going over exactly how I use leading lines to make my photographs more compelling, and if it's out already, I'll link it here. I'll see you next time.